Imagine waking up to breaking news. Another populist has just swept a major election. Flags waving, crowds chanting, promises of a nation restored. The headlines declare a populist earthquake. But here's the twist. This isn't a freak occurrence. In fact, you've been seeing this pattern for years, across continents, cultures, and economies. From Donald Trump's comeback in the US to Javier Milei's chainsaw-waving rallies in Argentina, the populist wave isn't just a ripple, it's the new normal. Why does populism keep coming back stronger, no matter how often it's declared dead? And what does this mean for the future of democracy, technology, and your savings? Let's break it down. At its core, populism is a political phenomenon that draws a stark line between the people and the elite. It's a frame, a lens, and sometimes a weapon. The fascinating part? Everyone seems to agree on that division, but almost nothing else. Is populism an ideology, a full-fledged belief system, like socialism or conservatism? Or is it more of a political style, heavy on dramatic speeches and emotional performance? Some academics say it's mostly a strategy, a way to gain and keep power by stirring up the crowd. But here's the real kicker. Populism is a master of disguise. It wears many masks. You'll find it on the right, championing traditional values, nativism, and national identity. You'll spot it on the left, railing against the corrupt business class and pushing for economic redistribution. The chameleonic nature of populism is both its greatest asset and its most dangerous trait. Right-wing populists often cast the people in cultural terms. Think of Donald Trump's rallying cry to make America great again, where the people are coded as hardworking, often white Americans. Or consider Viktor Orban in Hungary and Narendra Modi in India, both elevating national and often religious identity. Their elite enemies are government bureaucrats, cultural tastemakers, academics, and, crucially, international organizations accused of undermining traditional values. Left-wing populists take a different route. Figures like Evo Morales in Bolivia or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela define the people in economic terms: the poor, the working class, the marginalized. In the US, Bernie Sanders built his movement around the 99% left behind by the 1%. Here, the villains are big business, wealthy power brokers, and multinational corporations like the World Trade Organization or Davos's World Economic Forum. Notice something? Both sides unite crowds by dividing society. Their us versus them narrative is infectious, and in an age of economic anxiety and rampant inequality, it resonates deeply. But why now? Why has populism become so mainstream, so powerful, and, let's face it, so normal? Here's a shocker. Populism isn't new. Its roots stretch back to 19th century America. The original Populist Party championed farmers squeezed by Wall Street. In 20th century Latin America, charismatic strongmen built mass followings by promising land and dignity. And in post-war Europe, far-right parties exploited cultural fears and economic stagnation. Yet in the 21st century, something radical has changed. Populism has become a brand, a global movement supercharged by technology and political disillusionment. Think about the landscape post-2008. The global financial crash wiped out savings, homes, and dreams for millions. Tech platforms like Facebook and Twitter suddenly allowed angry citizens to find each other and to organize against elites, whether bankers, politicians, or journalists. The COVID-19 pandemic only poured gasoline on the fire, deepening mistrust and exposing inequalities that populists could exploit. It's not just anecdotal. According to a 2025 UC Berkeley study, we're living in the era of authoritarian populism. Leaders are centralizing power, weaponizing foreign policy, and using social media to bypass or bulldoze opponents. Surveys by Ipsos show skyrocketing disillusionment. People want strong leaders, even if it means breaking democratic norms. What once seemed fringe, far-right parties in Austria or the Netherlands, libertarian experiments in Argentina, is now mainstream, shaping the agenda in Brussels, Washington, New Delhi, and Buenos Aires. Populism is a thin ideology with two components, says political scientist Cass Mudd. The idea of a pure people pitted against a corrupt elite, and the belief that politics should be an expression of the will of the people. Sounds simple. But those pure people and corrupt elites can be defined in almost any way, making populism endlessly adaptable and dangerous. Critically, populism's normalization means it's no longer a sideshow. Populist parties aren't just fringe outsiders, they're running entire countries. Across Europe, Populists are one of the top 3 parties in country after country. Their leaders aren't shy about changing the rules. In Hungary, Viktor Orban has systematically dismantled democratic checks. In Argentina, Javier Milei slashes state budgets with theatrical flair, promising to break the old order. In India and Mexico, strongman leaders command huge loyalty despite, or perhaps because of, controversy and polarization. This trend alarms many observers. John Kampfner wrote in Foreign Policy, "A year of elections looms, and it could be a disaster for liberal democracy," warning that a populist surge threatens the fragile post-war consensus that built peace and prosperity. Yascha Mounk cautions that populism undermines democracy by questioning who should even have a voice, a slippery slope into anti-pluralism and exclusion. Still, populism's appeal is undeniable. Why? For one thing, mainstream parties have adopted populist rhetoric, promising to drain the swamp, attack media fake news, and vow to put the people first. This co-opting actually legitimizes the populists, making their ideas seem common sense. In some ways, traditional parties have been forced onto populist turf just to survive, blurring lines and stoking the hunger for ever bolder promises. Let's not forget technology. Social media has utterly transformed the playing field. Populists thrive in an environment where viral outrage wins the attention economy and misinformation can be weaponized in seconds. The result? Constant narrative chaos, eroding trust in institutions, experts, and even basic facts. During the pandemic, these dynamics reached fever pitch, with conspiracy theories flooding timelines and governmental credibility crumbling. But it's not just about internet memes and angry tweets. Real-world consequences are stacking up. In June 2024, European Parliament elections could hand unprecedented power to the far right, an outcome driven by farmers' protests against environmental regulations and mounting rural frustration. In Latin America, Milei's rise signals an economic experiment, slash-and-burn libertarianism with a dose of anti-establishment spectacle. Many of the populists' policy preferences are unrealistic, even unachievable, warns Harvard economist Jeffrey Frieden. If populists in government attempt unrealistic policies and fail, the results could be disastrous. The worry isn't just about wild promises. It's about what happens when those promises can't be kept, or worse, when they're implemented with no checks or fallback plans. On the other hand, some experts say populism acts like a pressure valve, forcing elites to listen to society's anger and frustration. Miriam Juan Torres from UC Berkeley notes that authoritarian populists provide a lens through which to interpret social and political reality at a time of a lot of uncertainty. In this reading, populists reflect deep societal anxiety. Ignoring them risks a much bigger backlash. But there's a darker side. The normalization of populism risks eroding democratic guardrails. As strongmen centralize power and scapegoat minorities, the very foundations of open societies tremble. Protectionist trade policies can trigger economic shocks. Radical agendas, implemented too fast or with too little expertise, can destabilize currencies, scare off investment, and fuel chaos, not recovery. Yet, for every warning about democratic erosion, there's an argument that mainstream parties have ignored real needs for too long. The rise of populism, some say, is a wake-up call to fix broken systems, whether it's stagnant wages, regional decline, or the feeling that distant elites don't care. So here's where the tension lies. Is the populist surge simply a dangerous passing storm, or a fundamental shift in how the world organizes economies and societies? Can democracy adapt to this new age, or is it doomed to fracture under relentless polarization and spectacle-driven politics? And as populists in power face the hard reality of governing, what happens when slogans meet stubborn economic facts? The stakes couldn't be higher. The choices made in the next few years, by governments, voters, and business alike, will shape the global order for a generation. But as populists tighten their grip on power and mainstream parties scramble to respond, we face a pivotal question. Are we on the cusp of a democratic collapse, or the dawn of a more responsive, inclusive politics? Let's dive deeper, because the true test is yet to come. What happens when the populist promises meet the cold, hard wall of economic and technological realities? And who wins or loses as the world tries to surf this never-ending populist wave? So what actually happens when populists take office and try to govern, especially in a world shaped by global supply chains, digital revolutions, and economic headwinds? Let's dive into the collision between the heady promises of populism and the cold, hard realities of power. Populist leaders, whether they rise from the left or right, often sweep into power with a tidal wave of voter enthusiasm. Their speeches are fiery, their policies promise to overturn the status quo, and their personas are wrapped in claims of authenticity. But governing, it turns out, is a very different beast from campaigning. Consider the striking case of Javier Milei in Argentina. An outsider economist and self-declared anarcho-capitalist, Milei stormed to the presidency on a wave of anger at Argentina's chronic inflation and corruption. He promised to chainsaw through bureaucracy and radically slash government spending. But once in office, even his most devoted followers saw that economic reality bites back. Global market pressures, opposition in parliament, and deeply rooted social programs limit how far any leader can go, even with a mandate for drastic change. This is the story again and again. Once insurgent populists meet the machinery of government, they face roadblocks that campaign rallies never prepared them for. Promises of sweeping change run into entrenched interests, legal roadblocks, and above all, the basic arithmetic of economics. Take Donald Trump's first term. He vowed to drain the swamp, bring back jobs, cut immigration, and get tough on trade. Some tariffs were imposed, taxes were cut, and immigration rules tightened. But the deeper promised transformation? It collided with the courts, Congress, and the tangled webs of global trade. Likewise, Brexit was hailed as a way to reclaim British sovereignty and prosperity, with promises of quick deals and unleashed potential. But the years since have shown just how complex disentangling from multinational agreements really is. And yet populists remain popular. Why? Because the underlying drivers, economic anxiety, cultural backlash, distrust in institutions, haven't gone away. If anything, they're growing stronger, amplified by social media's echo chambers and by a sense that traditional parties have failed to offer real solutions. A recent 2025 UC Berkeley study even coined the term authoritarian populism, describing leaders who centralize power, shape foreign policy by fiat, and use new media to build personality cults. India's Narendra Modi, Mexico's Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Hungary's Viktor Orbán, all are striking examples of strongman figures who fuse populist rhetoric with powerful executive control. These leaders win loyalty by promising to embody the will of the people and defeat a corrupt or cosmopolitan elite. But their rule often brings worrying side effects: attacks on the free press, judicial independence and minority rights, the elevation of loyalty over expertise. Political scientist Yasha Monk warns, populism threatens democracy by questioning who can legitimately participate, leading to anti-pluralism. The risks are real. As more countries turn towards so-called illiberal democracy, the foundation stones of open society, checks, balances, equal rights, start to erode. In Europe, right-wing populist parties are climbing in the polls, shaking the very core of the EU consensus. Austria, the Netherlands, France, and Italy all face a surge of nationalist parties promising to wall off borders and put real citizens above outsiders. But we can't ignore the opportunities too. Some experts argue populism can serve as a vital wake-up call, a corrective to complacent elites, a jolt that forces mainstream politicians to reckon with decades of neglect in rural or deindustrialized regions. In the words of John Kampfner, a year of elections looms, and it could be a disaster for liberal democracy. Yet if established leaders take heed, there's a chance to restore faith in the system by making it more accountable and responsive. There's no denying populism's appeal, especially when rapid social and technological change leaves millions feeling left behind. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, exposed and deepened inequalities. Many found themselves facing stagnant wages, disappearing jobs, and a sense that distant technocrats weren't listening. In such an environment, the message that the elite are failing you lands with particular force. Social media supercharges these messages, flattening the difference between fact and rumor. Populist leaders are adept at using platforms like X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp to bypass traditional gatekeepers and speak directly to citizens, sometimes even spreading misinformation along the way. So, where does this leave us? The future, according to the experts, is wide open. Scenarios range from deepening democratic decline, where rule of law is eroded and societies become more polarized, to a slow but steady renewal, as mainstream parties absorb the lessons of populist surges and rebalance their priorities. But there's a hidden risk. Populist leaders tend to oversimplify wickedly complex issues. Jeffrey Frieden at Harvard warns that many of the populists' announced policy preferences are unrealistic, even unachievable. which could be disastrous if they attempt them and fail. If populist policies flop, disappointment can be extreme. Let's not forget the case of Venezuela. Hugo Chávez's populist programs brought initial benefits for the poor, but, combined with over-reliance on oil and weakening of democratic safeguards, eventually spiraled into an economic and humanitarian crisis. Not every populist experiment ends so grimly, but the dangers are real when leaders sideline expertise in favor of slogans. Yet, looking ahead, populism is not doomed to spell disaster. In some cases, when populist movements fail to deliver, voters become disillusioned and switch back to more conventional parties. In Greece, Syriza's rise and subsequent retreat showed both the power and limits of left-wing populism. Sometimes, electoral success is followed by rapid reversals as economic or international constraints force a return to the center. On the other hand, when mainstream parties simply absorb populist rhetoric without real reform, they risk normalizing illiberal attitudes, making divisiveness or scapegoating permanent features of political life. That's the double-edged sword of populism's mainstreaming in Europe and the US. But what about you, the viewer, caught in the middle of this wave? What lessons should we draw from the populist era? First, stay skeptical. Recognize that leaders who claim to speak only for the people are usually excluding someone. Ask, who is being pointed to as the enemy, and why? Populism thrives on simple narratives and flashy promises. But as we've seen, translating those into reality is anything but simple. Second, understand the underlying issues. Populism takes root where people feel ignored or powerless. Economic insecurity, rapid social change, and distrust of institutions can be very real grievances. Instead of dismissing populist voters as duped, it's essential to recognize their concerns and demand that all politicians propose workable, realistic solutions. Third, defend pluralism and open debate. As tempting as quick fixes and strongman politics may sound, history shows that democracy's health depends on compromise, checks and balances, and equal rights. Cass Mudd reminds us, populism is a thin ideology. It adds up to us versus them. The challenge is building a system that goes beyond such divides. Fourth, be a critical consumer of news. Social media can be a powerful tool for connection, but it's also a breeding ground for misinformation. If a claim sounds too good or too outrageous to be true, double-check it. Don't let yourself be swept along by viral anger or enthusiasm. And finally, engage. Politics is not a spectator sport. Whether or not you support a populist agenda, your voice matters in holding leaders to account. Support independent journalism. Get involved in your local community. Ask tough questions. So, to return to our opening intrigue, can populist leaders' promises withstand the reality of governing, or do they spark deeper crises, or perhaps much-needed reforms? The answer is, it depends on the leader, the country, and above all, on whether citizens and institutions stay vigilant. Some populists crash on the rocks of reality, their movements fizzling amid broken promises. Others adapt, moderating their rhetoric and delivering incremental change. And some, especially those who dismantle democratic safeguards, do genuine harm. But here's the secret fact. Populism is not just about the leaders at the top. Its real power lies in the everyday choices of millions, what they believe, what they demand from their representatives, how they talk to neighbors with different views. Populism reflects and amplifies the hopes, fears, and frustrations within society. Its fate and ours depends on how we channel those energies, toward division or toward renewal. So, what do you think? Are we witnessing the dawn of a more responsive politics, or are the dangers too great to ignore? Let us know in the comments. If you found this deep dive valuable, give us a like and subscribe for more sharp analysis on the forces shaping our world. And remember,